your name, company you work at, and then how long you've been in sales. That would just be a good way for us to get to know everybody for those we haven't met before, and we'll get into it. So if I have not met you before, my name's Dustin Harper. Look forward to continuing to talk to you in the future. We do these monthly revenue performance webinars at Brevity. And really, what it's all about, it's really about you. We encourage engagement. We don't want to be talking the whole time. It's an open and learning forum to learn from your sales leader peers from a variety of industries. The typical topics are around where sales teams and reps struggle, and different ways to improve, tangible ways to get better in the future. As most of you know, Brevity is an AI role playing company, so we do a fun role play at the beginning that's very relevant to the topic. And then myself, the Brevity team, Kelvin, AEs, and we have the pleasure of having Brian Burns on these as well. If you don't know Brian, it's pretty famous on LinkedIn with his walk and talk videos, has a top five sales podcast, The Brutal Truth About Sales and Selling. And I know personally myself, as well as a lot of us on here, have gotten a ton of wisdom from him over the years with sales. So he'll be learning and chiming in throughout this, which will be great. And the topic for today, it's no secret that it's somewhat of a complicated economic environment out there. No matter what industry you're in, some are affected a little bit more than others. But the way we're looking at this is that some things are in our control and some are not in our control. So I like Stoicism and I read a lot of those books. There's a guy named Epictetus, and one of his quotes is, "We cannot control the external events around us, but we can control our reactions to them." So everything we're talking about today is things that are in our control as sales leaders, as sales professionals. So a few things that we're going to cover just to keep you here throughout the time is some practical tips to address common objections in difficult economies. What are the truths and myths of selling to CFOs? That's always an interesting one. Definitely ready to hear Brian's perspective on selling to the CFO. Is it needed? Is it not? So we're going to talk through that. Techniques to demonstrate value and ROI convincingly and making your outcomes believable. I think we struggle with making it believable, so we're going to go deep into that. And then if you stay until the very end, and you want it, we have a business justification template that I use myself that we can personally email to you. That way you get some value out of what we're talking about. So you'll hear a lot of stories throughout this. It won't just be me talking, I promise, and a lot of good, relevant feedback. So before we get into the role play, as far as the topic for today, it's the art of selling value in a shaky economy. That's really what the topic's all about. Brian, I want to ask you a question before we do that. When you think of selling value, I know you have a ton of people in your sales course, and it comes up quite a bit. What are you seeing with sales teams? Where are they struggling with selling value? Is there any insight you want to provide before we get started?
Well, I think everybody's comfortable talking about the product and the value it brings, and I think everybody does a great job with it. But as reps, what do we notice as the sale goes along? Not that first call, but second, third, fourth call. All of a sudden, people forget the value, and all of a sudden, you get compared against the lowest cost provider. And all of a sudden, now reps, instead of going back to the problem, they assume it's a negotiation. It's not a negotiation. They just naturally seesaw between value and cost. And we've got to keep it on the value side. Their instincts are to bring it to the cost side. Because if they see the value, then they don't have any strength. They don't have any leverage. But otherwise, we're going to either give it away or lose to a no-cost provider.
Thanks, Brian. And then a way to further demonstrate this is we're going to do a role play out of the gates. That's usually the most fun part of these webinars. And rather than me do it, because I'm not as good at it compared to our account executives, we usually have Ben and Niall do these, who are our founding account executives. So Niall's been great. Actually, met him this week in South Florida. And he's going to do a quick 5-minute role play around trying to convey the value over price with a economic buyer and getting some of those common objections that we hear around economy, et cetera. So now if you want to briefly introduce yourself and get that going, and thank you, bud.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Dustin. So my name's Niall Soccer. Ben and I joined Kelvin's team just over 8 months ago when Kelvin made the switch from founder-led sales to AE-led sales. Based in Miami, I see a few familiar faces and names here, so thank you everyone for joining. Dustin, I'm not actually sure if I'm better than you at this because you've actually gotten a higher score on this role play than compared to me the last few times we've done it. So we'll see if the bright lights help me perform. But really, what's going to happen here? I'm going to summarize. Hey, I just finished a demo with someone, right? So we're going to hop into that next part of the conversation where I want to reconfirm and contextualize the value and ROI we're going to provide. Unfortunately, this person and this persona is going to keep pushing back on me and saying, I know there's this ROI, but I need flexible payment terms, all these kind of things. My goal is to circumnavigate that. Ultimately, the goal of this trap in this role play is that it's harder than talking to, maybe someone in the real world. So let me pop in here. So many of you obviously have seen Brevity. So when you hop in as a rep, you'll be able to see what you're talking about and who you're talking to and the milestones you want to hit. So I'll keep the milestones up here for you all to kind of see myself hopefully hit these as I go. I'll turn off the hints so no one can say I'm cheating. All right, I'm ready for you guys to all roast me after this and tell me where I could have improved.
3, 2, 1. Start speaking.
Hey, Adam, I want to thank you again for the time during this demo and this evaluation as a whole for the past few weeks. I want to summarize kind of everything we've gone over recently. You mentioned that in the back half of this year, you guys have a huge product launch. The goal is to get your team up to speed and certified on that new product launch quicker than you have done in the past with these similar types of launches. I know something we've discussed recently is that even a 3% increase in performance versus the last product launch would yield a 750K jump in revenue in 2025. It also offer you and some of your sales leaders peace of mind. So it sounds like we have solid momentum and a solid use case. Want to see if there's anything I left out or any current concerns or objectives you have for the next portion of this conversation.
Thanks for that summary. Honestly, my main concern still revolves around the budget and clearly understanding how we can pace this investment without risking cash flow. Can you provide examples of how others have phased in this solution successfully?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk through phased approaches. I shared the case studies with a couple of clients similar to you recently. I'll send those back over as well. But really, when I think about a phased approach, it ultimately comes back to making sure we tackle the problems that are most important to you. So you mentioned that you guys need to certify your reps quicker. So I think you wanted to get it down from 6 months to 3 months. So if we take two phased of approach, it's not going to be able to tackle phasing it down to 3 months. But could you share a bit more with me why these budget constraints are so important to you when the goal is that 750K jump in revenue?
Our budget constraints really boil down to maintaining stability in an unpredictable economy. We have to be strategic about every investment we make. We're aiming for that impressive revenue boost, sure, but it's crucial for us to ensure that our cash flow remains intact during this transition.
Gotcha. I hear you. So it sounds like with the uncertainty coming on, cash flow is basically the most important thing or one of the most important things you're thinking about. And I know looking kind of doing my research before this, that MailChimp saw a lot of success in weathered the storm in 2008 and 2020. And hopefully now you'll do the same. Obviously, we talked about this earlier, but one of the important things to do during these uncertain times is to double down on your team and your ability. And that's how you'll come out ahead of your competitors. But in terms of the cash flow issue, is that just not being able to get the payment done in Q2? Or could you tell me more about these cash flow issues and concerns you guys have?
Absolutely, you're spot on that cash flow continuity is a major consideration. The concern mostly revolves around balancing current commitments and planned investments. Ensuring that neither stifles our ability to remain agile is vital, especially given the market volatility. Perhaps more flexible payment terms or breaking the implementation into smaller, manageable phases could help us mitigate this risk. What's your proposal on that?
Look, I don't want you guys to suffer from the roll like a I guess sorry a lower rollout because I know the goal of this rollout is getting that immediate improvement on the certification process and timeline. So I'm willing to work with you on this. Ultimately, what we found in situations like this, it works best if an executive on my team can speak with an executive, especially your CFO in this case, to make sure we align on what the goals are for your CFO in terms of cash flow over the next few months and what we can do as a company. So what I can promise is that if you can get a meeting set up with your CFO and my CEO, we can definitely come to an agreement and work on flexible pricing in that case. Is that something you can do for us?
I appreciate your willingness to collaborate, and involving the CFO sounds like a strategic next step to ensure alignment. I'll work on setting up that meeting and see how we can align on flexible terms. It's important we get this right.
All right, perfect. So I'll send over an invite for next Tuesday at 2 p.m. It's open on my CEO's calendar. If it's open on your CFO's calendar, let me know. And if not, we can reschedule. Does that work for you, Adam?
Tuesday at 2 p.m. should be manageable, but I'll have to confirm with our CFO first. I'll get back to you as soon as I have an answer.
Thanks. Let's see what I got.
Moment of truth. Moment of truth.
Uh,
Drum roll.
I know they're keeping me. Oh man. All right.
so
So
let's see.
solid C. And that's how it felt in the moment. So I'll
Start
open it.
stop continue say, Niall. What is
What'd you say?
what does the start stop continue feedback say?
Yep.
Well, how about the audience while we're pulling that up? Any feedback for Niall? You think he did well? What would you got to give him some positive and maybe some room for improvement in the future? Anybody have anything out there for him?
I like what you did at the end. The like, yeah, we're willing to work with you, but you got to set up this executive level meeting, like little give and take. That way you can really get to the C level quicker, and then you have an opportunity to go through the value with them as well. I'm gonna steal that. I like that part.
I
As you
think
can see,
bringing it back to the increase in revenue. Why are they doing this? They're not doing this to save money. They're doing this to make money.
yeah.
You know, does anybody really care about the cost of their Harvard education? They whine about it, but they pay it because they know what they get at the end.
You're saying I did that or didn't do that,
You did it.
but
It
not
took a
enough.
while, but you did it.
I did
Well,
it. It's funny because this morning I did this role play 3 times and I did it, and then I got a whole audience and
and for the people on the webinar, that's not the important part. The important part is you got comfortable pushing back.
yeah.
That's what people aren't doing. You didn't cave. You didn't say, well, maybe if we did 20 points off, could we get it done in June? Which probably 90% of the people would do. Or, what can you do this quarter?
That's the
And
value of practice. Yep. Sorry.
yeah, because you felt comfortable with it, because it wasn't a negotiation.
Yeah, I caved this morning a couple times, but I was like, I need to not cave on this webinar. What can I do? And the CFO thing actually, that wasn't premeditated. It kind of popped into my head as I was going. But luckily, when
Yeah,
you practice a few times, you start to iterate in these practice sessions and you see things that work.
yeah. Just think if when you go to look for a house or a car, you probably start at the high end. Then you do the math and then you sway back to the Camry, right? And then you're like, oh, I deserve more than a Camry, and you move it back up. But what you want is the 911 at the Camry price.
Yeah.
But that doesn't exist.
That's what Adam wanted too, the persona that I was talking to.
Yeah, everybody does.
Yeah.
But is that really a buying conversation or is that progress? Progress is made by going back. Why are we doing this? What changed?
Yeah, how
Anyone?
about I think a couple people might have been saying something. I'm gonna pick on some people's names. Don or Kurt. Any feedback from that? Is that stuff that you guys see in real life as well, or any feedback for Niall?
Anyone not at Brevity or named Brian have any feedback?
Mute Brian.
I have some feedback.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren.
Yeah, no problem. So this is my first time here on the Brevity call, so I thought it was really great. I actually haven't used Brevity yet, but I will be this afternoon. But I just want to say, Niall, there are a lot of times where people stumble over what they're saying or they take too long to kind of respond to whatever the person they're speaking to is saying. And I felt you did a really great job with your flow. So it's not necessarily about what you were saying, even though that's most important, but the way you presented yourself was phenomenal. So great job, Niall.
Thanks,
I
Lauren.
would have given
Actually,
you an 80% for
yeah, I
sure.
thought so. I actually
Take it
thought
up with brevity.
I thought I was gonna get an 80 plus, to be honest. That it felt like an
That
80.
AI's got to catch
It
up.
felt like 80. I
It
would
felt like a
agree.
B minus.
Yeah.
Lauren, the cool thing about that is so you can program the speed of the response time.
Yeah.
I keep it at about a second because it allows me to take a pause if I need to, but I can't pause too long or I'll get interrupted by the AI. And so you can
Oh,
just when you start today, you can adjust it. And if you have any questions, I don't know if you have a meeting set up with someone.
I do with Brad. Yeah.
Okay, so
I don't know
Brad
if
will
Brad
show
wants.
you how to adjust the time that you have
Great.
to on. So it helps you that I start pausing it, but I'm like, there's an internal split second clock in my head where I need to hurry up and say something.
Smart. Okay. Well, you did great. Great job.
Thanks, Lauren. Appreciate it.
And to double down now on what you did, I also really appreciate it. Sometimes I blame my board or hey, we got to get to the next day. You got to set it up with my CEO. So leveraging a little bit of the blame game is something that is one of my favorites. Is even one of the logos behind this is like, hey, I actually forecasted this. I might have jumped the gun and forecasted this deal. Um, if we're not going to close, I just want to be able to proactively let my board know because I might have got overzealous, and that's also been a good way to just kind of humanize it a little bit. Blame the board, blame Kelvin, blame your well as a
Yeah,
way to get things going.
yeah, Kelvin knows one of my favorite sales tactics is throwing him under the bus. I try to do it at any possible option. Like, oh, I got to talk to my CEO, or he really wants to present this to his board this quarter. Do you think there's any possibility, et cetera, et cetera? So always, I wouldn't go overboard, but I always try to do that if you can.
Appreciate that, guys. Anything else from the audience before we get going? We'll get you guys talking more as we go. I'm gonna keep letting awkward silences happen, so just get used to it. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So just going a little bit deeper into this topic, and we have a lot of takeaways for you, tangible takeaways as we wrap this up the next 20 or 25 minutes. But the art of selling value in a shaky economy. So if you look at the definition of what Nile was going up against there, it's really the challenge that we all have selling on price sometimes versus the value created. But you got to think of from your buyer's perspective, they're tasked a lot of times to prioritize cost savings, to uh, avoid budget constraints, risk aversion. They have pressure to show ROI immediately. I think that's something that we always forget too. So you have to put yourself in their shoes. And the default is comparing price because that's something tangible that they can look at compared to the competition. So uh, we're all guilty of not doing this, but like putting yourself in their shoes, where are they coming from? That's usually what's happening with the buyers. So what does it sound like? You saw some of that with Niall's role play, but here's some other common ones that come up a lot. That first one is a classic, but it's a hard one sometimes to get past, is we don't have any budget. That comes up a ton. Brian, I know you have a pretty good opinion on this. When you hear that we don't have any budget, what comes to mind for you?
It's just an excuse. It's like we don't have time. We're busy. It's not a reason. It's an excuse. I've helped reps who call on Apple or Google and they go, well, they told us they don't have any budget. Well, they have $100 billion in the bank. I'm sure if it was important, could find it. I think reps assume that it's real. It's just no interest. So you have to go back and build the interest.
Makes sense. Another one that comes up, how much is this going to cost? That could come earlier than later. Your solution sounds great, but competitor X is offering the same thing for less. That can be a really tough one. In those situations, you know that this is going to come up. You know what your competition is going to do. So how can you get ahead of that? Control the narrative more. If you know competitor X is going to be a low cost leader, having that conversation and letting your champion or champions know about that before. So at least you're controlling some of that versus it coming out of nowhere and someone higher up wanting to go that way. How can you prove this will save us money in the long run? We're going to talk a lot about the ROI and the business case, but get some numbers in front of them. I think sometimes we're shy just to even put some ROI numbers out there. Let them correct you. People love to correct you when you're wrong. So it has to be back and forth. You can't expect to show them ROI numbers one time and it's going to be perfect. It needs to be passing that baton back and forth. But the earlier you start that, the better. So you actually get their perspective on it. Impact of not mastering and practicing this. So first off is losing to no decision. That's the biggest competitor out there. That definitely is going to happen if you're selling on price and not the value over the long term. And this is going to vary depending on your industry, but it's certainly going to commoditize your product and your service even more the more you're doing this every quarter. And then discounting prices significantly. The default is to give a discount at the end of the quarter. We're all guilty of this at times, but they're gonna get that muscle memory and used to that, so it's gonna be harder to overcome that in the future. So how do you avoid some of those? And we're gonna have some practical tips and takeaways after that. But one story real quick that I want to share with you guys. So the first company I worked for out of college was Milwaukee Tool, and they were about 500 million in 2007. And obviously 2007, 2008 was a not a good time for power tools and construction with what was going on with the economy. And they made some pretty drastic moves to make some bold bets for the future. They actually stopped selling to Lowe's and partnered with Home Depot exclusively. In 2012, they stopped selling to Amazon and partnered with HomeDepot.com, and they started investing heavily in their people, heavily in training throughout that. And it just always stood out to me because I saw that from the ground up because I joined in 2010. But those were huge decisions, and they were on the brink of losing a ton of money at times. But you fast forward like 12 or 13 years later, and they were 10 billion in revenue, and they were number one in market share, where they were like number five before. So the reason I bring that up is it's a cool story in general, but also there's a ton of those type of stories when there are economic downturns, whether we agree with that or not. There's so many companies, so many different industries that are crushing it, and they take advantage of some of these opportunities, and they become more innovative, they become more creative, and they do things to double down during those times. So I wanted to share that real fast. But going into the next slide, I have a question for the group here. Do you guys have any examples of your teams where they're being proactive and they maybe offer something different of value versus just a price discount? Does anybody have a story of a way they show value versus just price?
Yeah, I can go because something that we're facing more and more in our space is we get a lot of questions about adoption and usage. Like I think this is role play we're talking about specifically, but like CRMs and all these other sales tools out there, a lot of companies have been burned with reps not even using it, not even logging in and really taking advantage of the tool. So something that the team at Brevity is trying to get ahead of is bringing that up early. Like to Dustin's point, being proactive. Like here's something that your executives are probably going to ask you, and here's how we're mitigating it. So getting ahead of those traps that they're coming. It's just a matter of time. Just nip it in the butt off from the get-go, and it's proven to be very effective for us in our process.
And to double down on that. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
I think it's important to note that no matter what you're selling, in what industry, you're facing these things, the value versus the cost. It's going to come up whether you're selling a car or you're selling $1 million piece of software. And the problem is it comes up when you don't feel ready for it. It's usually when you're in deep rapport, you're ready for the deal to make progress, and you hear it, and it throws reps off. So they know how to handle some of this stuff in a nice, comfortable, Starbucks coffee conversation with a coworker. But when they're in deep rapport with a client, the deal's making progress, and all of a sudden this comes up, they take it as a negotiation or they tend to panic and crumble. And this is why these drills, these 5 minute exercises to get people comfortable with it. And that's why Nile sounded so authentic because it's the perfect combination of authenticity and good process together. Go ahead, Calvin. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say to double down on Ben, like just the hard R, and we're going to talk about this, but the hard ROI stories when they're believable, but also selling the proven adoption strategies. And we have at least 15 unique different ways to get the sales team incentivized to actually adopt, leverage the software. You're selling the hard ROIs, but you're also selling how this is done because it's not just technology. You got your people, you got your product, and you got your process. So making sure we're selling that as a part of making this believable. So we're talking about value versus cost. A big part of the value is making sure people are using it. So I just wanted to double down on that. But just having those proven adoption strategies documented has also been really big for us as a part of our sales process.
Appreciate that, guys. Michael, cardiac RMS. You got any feedback on this? Do you guys get pushed on doing price discounts?
So interesting. We have a different pricing model where we charge patients insurance for our work, but there's a lot of our competitors that are quote unquote cheaper. So yeah, we have to do ROIs and things like that to make sure that cheaper doesn't mean better,
Equals.
or lower cost, I guess is the way to say it.
Appreciate that, man. Thanks for sharing. All right, so going on to the last 15 minutes here. So giving you guys some tangible takeaways for the future. So what are the common objections that are going to come up during these type of situations? We've talked about quite a few of them, but some ways to prevent them from happening and be a little bit more proactive. We love using the word proactive. So this idea of these bi-weekly syncs, it seems so simple, just having something on the calendar every 2 weeks, whether that be before the deal closes, during a pilot, or during a rollout, but just having that touch point could be 15 minutes or less, but that know, like, and trust you build up, assuming you're pretty good at what you do in sales, that could help you win a 50-50 situation where it does come down to more of the price. So that's a super easy one that you can do. Value adds in between. So as salespeople, we're always asking for something typically, unfortunately. So how can you give value in between, whether it be uh, webinars like this, whether it be industry news that's really relevant to them, new product launches that they might be excited to hear about. So you can systemize that with your CRMs and whatnot, but that's a huge thing that I think gets left out a lot of times. And then assuming it is somewhat of a tougher economy, that means that more people will be involved with the decision. It might take longer in theory. So you have to multi-thread at the beginning of these sales processes. The longer you wait, the harder it is to meet those business folks. And most time people are just meeting the business folks at the very end when cost is being talked about. So can you multi-thread early, intentionally, and you know that there's going to be more people involved because of what we're talking about? Negotiation. I think now you did a great job of going back and forth on that role play, but we sometimes take this part for granted or we don't prepare the right way. Brian, what are you seeing with like your students or just out there right now? Are people negotiating the right way, or are they leaving a lot to be left on the table?
Well, I think what Niall did is what you ideally want is to hold back the negotiation to trigger the closing meeting with the economic buyer. Because if you don't do that, any concession you make is worthless because you didn't get anything. If you're negotiating with somebody who doesn't have the final authority, it's going to be the starting point for when they meet with the economic buyer, who's going to want yet another 10 points off of it. If you force that executive to executive meeting, if your deal makes sense to do that, it might be too small. But if you force that meeting, then all the issues come forward and the economic buyer gets briefed on this because he's not going to meet with somebody who's not briefed on. And if it's contextual that, hey, we're going to cover all the final issues, the executive's going to know this is a closing meeting and he knows what the other executive is going to want. But that meeting won't take place without a reason. And the reason that the client wants is the best price. The reason we want is to close the deal.
And Brian, one of the things I love that you taught me is leaving an abstract discount in exchange for that meeting or an abstract incentive, not giving the concrete incentive, but like, you know, if you're able to do this, we can definitely get more flexible around the implementation fee or the something in that realm that's abstract, but it's like, oh, we're going to get a deal, making them feel good, and then that creates that incentive to actually make that meeting happen. Or you can identify they're not willing to even meet. Going back to your earlier point about did we really do a good enough job building interest?
Right. If they're not going to meet, what's the likelihood it's going to close?
And
Probably
on
not
that
this.
vein around building interest, like what's helped us is when we have similar, credible, and relevant case studies that talk about some of the specific challenges they might have been facing when it comes to sales readiness, pipeline generation, or even closing, outside of leveraging a concrete case study with the strategic outcomes. What are some other ways that people should be building interest, Brian, that they're not doing? That could be more beneficial. So when we see that one objection of we don't have budget, what are some other ways to be
Well,
really building that interest?
the best way to create value with any client is talking about what they care about. And it's not the product. It's maybe the problem. It's what they're facing within their own company. Ask them questions about the internal politics. What does their leadership think of this? What are the alternatives to solve this problem? Who cares about this the most? And these conversations about their career at that company, no one does this because everyone's focused on the transaction. But if you only talk about the transaction, that's the only reason they'll talk to you is when they want something out of the transaction, which is usually a concession. Great reps kind of talk to them about what they care about. What brought you there? What keeps you there? Where do you see yourself going there? Believe me, they'll answer you.
One last thing on some of the other ideas to be creative and prevent some of this is you don't need to be an influencer by any means, like posting on LinkedIn and all that, but you can also be a curator of information. So how can you master some of the industry trends, what's going on in your specific use case in the industry, and you can post about that or share that with your client. I think that's a great way to stand out and keep the momentum going and show value outside of just cost related items. And then just getting ahead of the business case, starting that as early as possible. We're going to walk you through a few ways to make it more believable here in a second. And that's a great way as well. Next one is selling to the CFO or not. I guess it's a question. It could vary for sure based off your deal size, industry, et cetera. But a lot of times I think we need to get in front of the CFO or we need to speak the CFO language. And it's sort of a confusing idea to think about depending on your background. Brian, I think you have a pretty good opinion on this one, but should we be selling to the CFO? Should we put a lot of things together for them, or is it not as important as we may think it is?
Well, most people think since the CFO is chief financial officer that they make all the financial decisions. They administrate the financial decisions. And I did a great interview with a CFO on the podcast. If you go to my YouTube channel, just search CFO, you can watch the interview. And I get into it because I was kind of tired of hearing reps talking about selling to the CFO. I'm like, do you sell to shipping and receiving? I mean, why are you doing that? You go in the wrong direction because the CFO will listen to you and then they will say no because they don't care. It's not their job. They have an opinion. And the question I asked him, I go, if the CEO wants to do something and you do not, do you do it? He goes, of course I do it. So which one are you going to sell to? The person who tells them what to do or the person who's going to give you an automatic no that you believe is a valid no, that you then have to come back with them with more ROI and stuff, and it's still no. It's no because they don't know what to do with you. And I learned that from a CFO. And this business justification came out of a conversation with the CFO because I asked him, when you go to the board and you need that final approval for something that's over seven figures that's in the corporate documents that it has to go to the board for final approval, what do you show them? And he goes, this is what I show them. And I took that and I started selling with it. I cut it down and made it more applicable for each customer. But compare it to a quote, which doesn't tell a story. There's no why. It's just a cost.
Appreciate that. And that's a good segue to the last part, which is definitely another value add for you guys that are still on the call, is what we call the business justification, what Brian was talking about, but it's really making it a believable and reasonable ROI, making it as simple as possible for your champion or yourself to convey this convincingly internally and speaking their language. That's the first point. Is a lot of times we want to put all of our stuff in there, like our products, all of our jargon, all that type of thing, but that just screams that it's probably not realistic. So how do you work with your champion to speak their language and make it in their words? That's something that's really important. So being somewhat of a project manager there, realistic increases, right? I mean, if you put 60, 70%, that may be true, but I think there's a little fatigue out there with ROIs in general where people just instantly don't believe stuff because they have so much information coming at them. So why not make it more reasonable, right? Because those 1 or 3% increases could actually impact numbers in a big way, depending on what you're selling. Or maybe it's something related to employees, 1 to 2 employees and OpEx, but trying to look at that and then again, have them correct you, right? If you're don't have the correct information, people love to correct you. So it needs to be bounced back and forth. That's the idea. You can't just submit it one time and it's going to be perfect. Cost of doing nothing, we always forget about that. One of the better ways to showcase that is having a timeline and working backwards. So Niall's example with the new product launch, figuring out the date that that chief sales officer wants to get revenue by and when the product is launching. And if they don't have something implemented before that, they're not going to be able to get the results they want. That's a great way to work backwards and get people a little more urgency going. And case studies, use cases, sprinkle that in throughout the conversation. And would like to see if a lot of people out there are using case studies as well, but that's a great way too. So what we're going to do for you, if you're still on, put in the chat like your name and business justification. We'll document that and I'll send you an example of what we're talking about. That way you can use it for your own situation. So put that in the chat now if you want that. We got about 5 minutes left here. One question I had though is while we're talking about case studies, I feel like ROI and case studies, there might be a little bit of fatigue with it sometimes, but the audience, do you guys find case studies being really effective for you? Are you able to use those to convince your prospects to keep moving forward and close deals?
I'd say absolutely. I'm curious, Brian, how would you recommend doing the case studies? introducing those?
Um, I would use it in the context of a client that's as close to them as possible and ask them, would you be curious to learn how AWS went through this process? How Home Depot went through this process? Of course, they're going to say yes. Have it be a conversation. Don't send a PowerPoint,
Yeah.
okay, or a PDF. That can back it up, but they're going to look at it and it's going to look like every case study.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk them through it. It's like, what does brevity see? Everybody thinks sales is knowledge. If that was true, everybody who listened to my podcast would be a billionaire right now. That's not true. And I start off the podcast the same way every time. It's nice to know how to sell. It's better to know how to sell well. And it's an everyday thing. How you sell well in each call. It's a performance. How well you did it. Each conversation is a performance. How well did you get to the root cause? How comfortable were you? How'd you build rapport with them?
Yeah, I've been listening to your podcast for like 7 years. I'm definitely not a billionaire, so I got a bone to pick with you on that one.
I think it's the 2.5 speed that you're working with. You're trying to
Yeah,
get there too
good point.
fast.
Yeah, but well, we got a few
It's
minutes
all
here,
those
but
note
really,
takers.
yeah, got a few minutes here. The moral of the story is, hey, whatever's happening with the economy, we can't control that, right? That's all out of our control. So what we talked about today is what we can improve on as salespeople, as leaders, and that's what it's all about. So appreciate you guys joining. We got a few minutes here to wrap up. Any thoughts, questions? Let's see, Don, Morgan, Angela. Any takeaways from you guys or questions you wanted to ask throughout that you weren't able to? All right. Well, we appreciate everyone joining. We'll continue to do these every month. You'll see some changes with how it gets distributed through Zoom webinars, but we appreciate everyone joining. We'll recap everything next week and good selling and have a good rest of your weekend.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
everybody.
Good.
Thank
Thank you.
you.